welcome to all of you. Welcome to this 22nd anniversary of human design. It's always an interesting week for me. I have spent most of my career over these 22 years being deeply involved in the logic that's revealed in the mechanics, and in doing the work of laying out that information that is the bedrock of what it is that we have in human design, that is the science of differentiation. I have never really spent a lot of my energy in dealing with the oddities of the beginnings of human design. When I began my career, the New Age was peaking in terms of all kinds of things that were attractive to people. And though my own mystical process is something that has been profound and for me just without words to describe it, it was never the point, at least from my perspective, and I think that I've made that clear over the years. The point has always been the knowledge itself, what human design is and what human design can do. As a matter of fact, I'm here 22 years later doing this because of you, in that sense, because of all of those beings that in one way or another were ready to see that this was something of value. I know what kind of a process it is, a journey it is, to introduce something that's new. And every one of these anniversaries is always in its own way a surprise for me. This journey has gone as far as it's gone. But as I have often done on these anniversary occasions, I have a chance to do the mystical side. As beautiful as human design is, as aesthetic as the mechanics of the Maya are, for me anyway, as extraordinary the tools that are inherent in the knowledge, for me, I know where all this began. It began with the miraculous or the mad, depends on one's perspective. And there is no way, given the circumstances of my encounter, that I can ever be released from that. In a sense, everything since my encounter has been a kind of I was going to say a kind of deterioration, but in a sense it is. It's a kind of wearing down within the Maya itself to take this this experience, which was so outside of what real seems to be, and to have spent these 22 years in grounding it as deeply into the Maya as one can. I mean, the journey of human design is a journey through the homogenized world, and it is a dense Maya out there. I had a few moments this week where, in reflection, I suddenly, grasped the distance for me between where I sit today and the world I inhabit right now, and where I was 22 years ago. And I clearly remember where I was then. And that was a deeply alone and confusing transition to step out of the density of the encounter. I mean, it was 8 days and nights. There is a quality to it that, when you lose it, when you fall out of it, you'll never have it again. You just know. My whole mystical process began with me suddenly being Ra. In that era when all of that began, which was in 1983, I would introduce myself as Robert. The Ra just suddenly came into existence when I landed on this island of Amazing. I didn't make any kind of mythical connection to it until I began going through various strange experiences that eventually led up to my encounter. This connection to the sun. Interesting thing, the voice spent a great deal of time teaching me about the nature of the sun. I think if you go back into the psychohistory of humanity, you can only get to sun worshippers at some point. Probably for most of Homo sapiens' existence, in terms of percentage, we have been sun worshippers. It only made sense, after all. What was fascinating for me, and only later, I think that in the experience itself only survival mattered. But the way in which I was given the cosmology, which is the way my process began, these trinities that we have spread out all over the place in the roots of so many religions. According to the cosmology that I was given, the sun is a trinary crystal system. This illustration basically shows you the way in which the primary design crystal shattered. And what you have here is that you have the center. And what you have over here is the camel. And what you have over here is the dog. So you're looking at these three elements that are at the core of the crystal in that sense, and are at the core of the fractal relationship of everything else to it. Within the context of this drawing, what you're looking at going around here, that is in the areas that are color-coded, not the black areas, you're looking at the 16 faces. You're looking at the way in which the quarters of quarters in the wheel itself are ruled by the personality processes. It is the consciousness field at work. What I covered in detail in the quarter by quarter, the faces, the 16 faces of the Godhead, and what you may be familiar with by listening to Darmen's neutrino forecast, because he references it. It is the way in which fundamentally the whole personality process is organized. And that the whole personality process is organized not simply within the domain of the planet itself, but within the context of the solar system itself. So here, when we're looking at this particular core, we're looking at basically three elements. We can sort of think about them as personality crystals. Three elements that are in fact at the core of the sun itself. funny the way things work. Binaries are always fascinating, for me anyway, because of my particular relationship to the sun. I'll get back to that. Understanding the relationship between the camel and the dog, and ultimately the relationship between the camel and the dog in the center, is one of the mysteries of the way in which things work. First of all, to just give you a kind of brief idea, because this is not necessarily a teaching class. The dog. I love these names, by the way. I have no idea. Please understand that. I have absolutely no idea why they're called the dog and the camel. I really don't. I can speculate, as you are all free to do so. But it's not something that I know. It's just something that was there with this knowledge. First of all, the dog. If this was any other star in the sky, this is the only element that would be there. It is the same fundamental element that you find particularly in the stars that are part of the general programming, stars like Sirius and Alcyone and Dubhe and these kinds of forces. That fundamentally what you're looking at is that there would be this kind of crystal at its core, the dog itself. And basically what it does in essence is that it runs the sun in the same way that your design crystal runs your vehicle. And in the same way that your design crystal runs your vehicle and you breathe or, give off gas or however you want to look at it, that the way in which the dog runs the vehicle of the sun is that it gives off something that is very, very special to all of us. And that is, it gives off what in the mythology is called the string. That is, it gives the neutrino feed. 70%, just over 70% of the neutrinos that we receive directly from the sun. Those neutrinos, in essence, are produced out of the dog. This is its work. Its work in establishing the viability of the life of the sun. It's really something to think about very, very deeply. So the dog in itself has a very basic, if I can put it that way, has a very basic role that is not an uncommon role. The only thing that makes it different is that it is hierarchically different. If you think about it, one of the things to understand, as you can graphically out of this, is that out of the way in which the fracturing, again, you're seeing this, that it's done with perfect symmetry. That's not the way really to see it. But you have to sort of figure it in your imagination. If you're thinking about a crystal shattering, there are fractal lines that emerge, aspects that have boundaries with each other, that lead to boundaries with others, that lead to boundaries with others, and so forth and so on, and goes outward, because after all, we're dealing with numbers that are really quite spectacular in their zero content. So both of them in that sense, because they are closest to the center, both of them have a great deal of influence, after all. And a great deal of influence also means that the way in which that influence, how shall I put this, actualizes, leads to dilemmas that can exist right down here on this particular plane. Let's think about the camel, because the camel is it automatically makes you think about Egypt, doesn't it? The camel is one of those deep bazaras for me. What it does. You have the sun, and you've got the dog, and beside that you have the center. But the camel moves. The camel's on the outside, if we can call it an outside. The camel moves, and its movement is something that is very, very specific. That is, it has an 88-day cycle, and it is a cycle that exactly matches the rotation, the orbit of Mercury around the sun. It takes Mercury 88 days to go around the sun. This is not exact, it's 88 days point, blah, blah, blah. But the fact is that the movement of the camel is exactly synchronized to the movement of Mercury. Now basically what that means is that no matter what neutrino information is being produced out of the dog, that the neutrino information that is going to impact humanity is going to be controlled by the camel, and it's going to be exclusively expressed through Mercury. When I was being given the knowledge, I was given many, many elements. The synthesis that you see, that everyone has worked with in human design, there were other elements that were given to me that were never, I was never instructed to incorporate them, but I was given a way to see how they relate. As an example, the runes, and I guess most interestingly, you could say it was from the tarot, but it really has nothing to do with it, but I think it gives you a better way of grasping it, was something that was called sequencing. You know, the time that I, at least it feels this way in hindsight, the time I spent listening to what sequencing was enormous. It was an elaborate story. And the thing that's so remarkable about it is that from the moment that the personality crystal enters into the fetus, that is 88 degrees of the sun, approximately 88 degrees of the sun before birth, approximately 88 days, 88, 89 days. The moment that the personality crystal enters into the vehicle is the moment that it only accepts direct programming from Mercury. Now, it's really something to think about. That is, you know, every 88 days there is a new programming sequence that is delivered to us through Mercury. Now, when I say that it's delivered through Mercury, obviously the way in which planets act as activations within the matrix of the body graph, you know, that the information is there, you know, for the holistic process. But again, to recognize that this is all about the way in which we are controlled at the personality level. And the instrument that controls us at the personality level is the camel. Now let me go back a moment. There's 3 elements. Now the center isn't always there. But regardless where the center is, the responsibility of the center is to program the whole. Now the interesting thing about the center, which one would think is the most influential, is that it is blocked off in that sense by the camel in the way in which human beings specifically are programmed. Its job is everything else. So all the forms of life, for example, every other design that I was given, that the way in which the solar system itself operates, that all of that is the programming out of the center. But the direct programming of humanity is something that operates through the camel. Now, in the mythology that I was given, I was told that at the end of the round, and we're about 1,300 years from the end of the round, that at the end of the round, that these elements, the camel and the dog, incarnate. They incarnate once around. The camel. Now this is something that I explored, particularly in the early years, because I had a lot of clients, particularly in Germany at that time, who were born in that era, between 1936 and 1941. And some American students of mine who I met in those years. And I was always very curious about them, very curious about differences that I could note in their particular development. And there were, by the way. It's a very interesting study, anybody who ever wants to take a look at that. But basically what happened is that neither the camel nor the dog can incarnate as a human. As a matter of fact, the dog can only incarnate in very, very low forms of life. As low as an amoeba, as a matter of fact. Something that, is short. But the camel is different. The camel can take anything, a mammalian form, a reptilian form, whatever the case may be. It came into incarnation in 1936. In other words, it left the sun in 1936 and stayed on Earth till 1941. What that meant is that was the only time in the entire round that the center got to program humanity directly. Is what makes these beings rather interesting. Rather than the coordinated programming of personality consciousness, that's the role of Neptune, the role of Mercury in its relationship to the camel. Here was the direct influence, the direct solar influence, if you will, on personality consciousness, on those that were born in that era. So this is the one that's kind of scary. Every time I speculate about this one, one really doesn't know what to expect. That is, it's like taking your design crystal out of your body. What exactly is going to operate, if you know what I mean? It's supposed to happen in 2084. My assumption is that the longevity of that incarnation is probably going to be in seconds. Even so, I think it's going to disrupt the sun and it's going to disrupt the neutrino field. So, for those of you somewhere down the road who ever get to listen to this, if you do, because I won't be around in 2084, it's something we'll have to wait and see about that. That's the Ruina, by the way. That's the place where I lived when I had the experience. Actually, what you're looking through, this was originally the main door of the Ruina. And here, though it's difficult to distinguish it in this particular, drawing, but basically what you're looking at is you're looking at a well house. What you can't see is the opening of the well, which is over here. Okay? And there's a deep, cistern down here. The cistern dried out about 300 years earlier. It's why this house was left to go to ruin. No water, no way to be able to work the land. As far as I understand, the design crystal bundle came into this, what was deep underground, this cistern deep under here. In fact, inside here is not a courtyard. It was actually the main room, but it was open to the sky. It was only at the very back of this building that there was a single room that had been put back together again, and that was the room where I spent, with the exception of one evening where I came out to this inner courtyard, I spent all the time inside of that Ruina. It's funny about fear. I'm an integration ego manifester, so I guess, and designed for shock with my son in 51.5. I don't think I had a moment to really be afraid in the experience. I think if I had had a chance to grasp what was happening to me, I guess I would have been very frightened. It was more like, I was just being held in a thrall, and I was just holding on. What scared me was the end of it all. I guess it was about somewhere between 11 and 12, somewhere around midday. The sun is high early then. It was winter. The voice told me to go up the mountain, actually in this direction here. There's a hilltop about 200 meters up above where I was. Altogether rather high for the island, about 400 meters altogether, because the arena was on high ground. It told me to go up onto it was a very difficult walk, I remember that. I had not eaten or had anything to drink or slept for those 8 days, so I was in quite a state. And my body had a kind of odd sheath to it, sort of like when your foot's asleep. So it was an interesting process trying to find my balance trudging up this hill. And when I got to the top of the hill, I sat down, and the voice started to repeat something to me. I guess you would call it a mantra. It had maybe, I've never counted them, but I would guess no more than 24 syllables to it. And I was told to repeat it and open up my eyes and look at the sun. It's funny about fear. I mean, I'd been 8 days on the other side of the sky, and everything was okay, And this opening up your eyes to the sun, I think all of us from the time that we're tiny, this is one of those great warnings, every time there's an eclipse, all of these talking heads warning you about going blind and all that stuff. And I certainly didn't want to go blind. And as crazy as everything was, I'm no madman. I've stayed sane through all kinds of bizarre. And so I had this rush, this adrenaline rush, I guess, just a fear rush. And I opened up my eyes to the midday sun in Ibiza. And don't be fooled by it being winter. We're far south, and the sun is always hot. The air sometimes is cool, but the sun. It was an incredible shock. The first thing you get to see is the Blue Angel. It's a funny dancing blue thing. I don't know what it is. I was paying more attention to my esophagus. If you ever have the experience that you take a real shot of whiskey, that burn in your throat. I had a burn in my throat, and it was going all the way down the middle of my body. I've never felt anything like that. Harder than when you swallow a hot piece of food, that pain that goes through with the heat. And when it hit my stomach, I had a flood of nausea. And by the way, my eyes are still open. I can feel the tears washing my eyes, and the heat pouring through my body, just pouring through my body. I sat there a long time. When I stopped, it was all over. I remember treading down the hill and being absolutely astonished to see my dog Barley, who I was convinced was dead. I mean, he hadn't moved in 8 days. I assumed he was dead. I was dazed, I was weak. I don't really remember how I spent the day. But I do remember that going to sleep and waking up was something that was unbelievably fast. And I remember going outside. I was very cold. And the sun was up. And I just opened up my eyes to the sun. I would do that for nearly 2 years, every day. Sometimes while I was running. I still see pretty good, by the way, though I do not recommend this. The voice said that I had a relationship to the dog. I have no idea what it was for. I have no idea what value it brought into my own process. I obviously don't do it anymore, though every once in a while, I must say, I do take a peek. I just always assumed that the serendipity of being called Ra had some kind of intrinsic merit. Anyway, that's my mystical story for you. But it is the 22nd anniversary, and I am certainly open to whatever comments, questions, you name it.
Would you make any connection between the camel and the Second World War?
I mean, there's something logical in that, Philip. It's not something that I was told. The thing is that who it really affected were all of those beings that were incarnating. And so, these are children, and, even the ones born in 36, by the end of the war, they were 9 years old. So I don't really think it has a direct connection, though I think it's obvious that whoever these children are and wherever they were certainly born under the duress and tension of the homogenized world in one of its orgies of savageness. So certainly there was an impact on their psyche from all that. Hey, don't be shy, it's a party. Who is the voice? It's the design crystal bundle. This is, as far as I understand, this is what it is. It's what makes human design in that sense, or at least the way it was delivered, unusual. Most revelation is, not most, all revelation has been personality revelation. Human design, all design is form principle. It's not an entity at all. It is the design crystal bundle that is at the center of the earth, just as we have crystal bundles, personality crystal bundles around the earth. It's the yin-yang of the consciousness potential of the crystal field. All I was doing was that everybody got seeded in 1987. Everybody got seeded. I mean, it's the neutrinos going through the design crystal bundle. I was just the closest to it. The proximity created quite a phenomena, but in fact it was one of the first things that I realized that when I began my journey of trying to introduce this knowledge, that it was clear that, everybody in some way or another got seeded with this.
Hello, it's Bina. I don't know, maybe it's my illusion or hypnosis, but it seems for me, as far as I noted, people who was born between 36 and 41, they are really different from all others. Ra, what do you think about this?
Yeah, one of my favorites was Ed Stanton. Many of you might remember Ed. He and I looked at that a lot. That was a generation that had Pluto in the 56th gate as part of that. So there were some very interesting things about the fact that that generation was the beat generation. They laid the foundation for the Cultural Revolution of the 60s. Remember, they weren't specifically programmed by Mercury. This was a much broader scope, and I think it laid the foundation for the New Age, for looking beyond. It laid the foundation for advanced physics. I think it's a very significant generation.
I'm wondering if I'm the only one here who fits into that period of, you said 1936 to 1941. If there are others, I'm curious, and I'm wondering if they'd like to identify.
Yeah, that's true, Kiara. You are one of those, aren't you? It's and good for you that you're still here. Excuse me. One of these days there'll be somebody that really wants to investigate that. That would be delicious, because there's time involved in all of this, and to keep what their contribution is as a general map, because I think what you'll see is that they were always the generation that was ahead of their time. I've known some of these beings personally here in the island, people who first opened up an alternative way of life here, people who did that in the 50s and came out of that generation. And you can really see how much they contributed to, what the 60s were going to be. Yeah, Jürgen was one of them.
It's interesting because I was friends with both of those guys, Ed and Jürgen, and we would have some of the most far out, weirdest, interesting conversations. It was really fun.
Yes, would have been nice to be a fly on the wall. I'm sure it was.
Yeah, I remember you saying at one time that there was a special relationship between the 4323, the 2838, and the 3955. And I wondered if you could kind of elaborate on that. What was the real connective thing with that? What do they do for each other, or why is that a special, apart from the fact that they were very individual? Deafness.
One of the great dilemmas of individuality is how sensitive they are to acoustics. The very sensitivity to acoustics opens them up to the possibility of mutation. Yet at the same time, the sensitivity to acoustics also means that there's all kinds of stuff around them, and how do they filter it? The way they filter it is that they're fundamentally deaf. If you've got a 2838 and they're in struggle mode, you're not going to be able to tell them anything. If you've got a 5539 and they're into one of their mood trips, you're not going to be able to tell them anything. If you've got a 4323 telling you that they know something and you're telling them that they don't, they're not going to be listening to you. So on one side it can be irritating to others, but it's the way in which the purity of the individual process is maintained. Without deafness, without the ability to be able to filter out the noise in that sense, is the only way that individuality can maintain its purity. Yeah.
Also, I remember you saying something about integration, that integration really isn't here and participate in mutation. That the individual circuit is about mutation, but the integration circuit doesn't mutate. I wonder if you could kind of elaborate on that.
Well, it doesn't mutate in the basic sense that it is the most primitive, and in that way can be deeply stuck in its own survival. I mean, it saved my life. I'm integration. So, I'm deeply aware of without it, there is no way that I would have survived. So it's very primitive in that sense. But, integration is always waiting for, the initiation. And it is one of the things that, is the only way in that sense. It's like with the 2838. The 2838 can bring the mutative process immediately into integration because it opens it up to the possibility of not, funny enough, being deaf to the other. I mean, those particular awareness channels, they carry with them the deepest demands that are there for the individual. That is to find their spirit and their purpose, through knowing, and it has to be their own knowing. So they have their power.
Ra, I have questions for you. Could you make for me some clearness about one thing? Several years ago in Ibiza, on the channel about demons, angels, hosts, and so on, you said that you got education process from the fifth color, but at the same time we know that you got information from the bundle of crystal of design. So could you comment this?
I don't know where you found that. It's always been the same, and it's always been described in exactly the same way. Always. Christian. It's an interesting point, Christian. And it's clear to me that one of the main themes that I was given, and something that I've talked about a lot, is that I was given knowledge for the future for children. It's still something that I talk about a lot because, of course, if you look at the way in which a nine-centered being is supposed to develop in their lives, those of us who began our lives as homogenized beings, our opportunities to fulfill the full potential of what we're here for is limited. There's no question about it. So, those beings born after 1987, I think that they're the ones that, naturally are ready to receive the information that can come to them. I'm not messianic, never have been. I'm a deeply hierarchical being in my understanding of the nature of the Maya. It is clear to me that on this plane, 4% to 4% is basically where the possibility is of, those human beings that have a way in which they can step out of the embrace of the program and find their way. It's very limited. So there are many other factors other than simply being born post-1987. I do think that what it does bring is that, certainly as a date, and that goes along with, the supernova 1987A, the harmonic convergence of the Mayans. 1987, it was a platform year, and it was sort of the clarion announcing that there's something new going on. Why 4%? Basically the relationship of atomics to dark energy and matter. We are always under the perceptual assumption that atomics is the nature of the universe, because that's what we see and what we relate to. But in fact, atomics, which is where the mutative engine of cognition is a mere 4%. So it is basically, it's basically a way of looking at a formula, and because it all works like that, the above and below and such. I've always calculated it somewhere between 35 and 50 million people at any given time given our population of over 7 billion, that's really where the possibility is. Most of the world doesn't have access to the knowledge. Most of the world has enough trouble surviving. Half of our planet doesn't get enough calories a day. This world is filled with violence and suffering and all kinds of stuff. Even those that are gifted enough or unusual enough or bizarre enough to be able to step out, in some societies, the punishment for that is not something that anybody wants to think about. And why the 4 of the 4? Because I've seen it. I used to do, I did so many of them for a very long time, public lectures, introductory lectures. And, it's the 4% that gets to show up, but it's the 4% of the 4% that goes a step further. You are, as a homogenized being, you are drawn to things for all kinds of different reasons that have very little to do with what's going on. And whether or not you go beyond that is something else. Bindu. Yeah. Let's put it this way. I could answer that question. But it would be not something that I would want to have recorded and kept for posterity. I'm very careful about what anything is claimed in my name. I do know that in a very technical sense, it is indeed my dog. But then again, what to say of all of that. When I started my process, I wondered, what are people going to say when you tell them, a voice told you how everything works? I mean, it's really mad. It's really mad. All of it's mad. The only thing that has saved me is the 22 years that I've worked at the science of human design. Because it's remarkable what it does for a human being. It's remarkable what it reveals. But, the guy that lived in that building over there, that's a totally different piece of business. It really is. The other thing to grasp about this knowledge and about incarnative evolution, it is hierarchical. Human design's always been elitist. Some people hate words like that. But I mean that in a fractal sense only. It isn't for everybody. I mean, it could be, but it isn't. I mean, it never is going to be for everybody. It just doesn't work that way. I mean, the beauty of understanding the mechanics, I'm a practical 5-1. You understand the mechanics and you just see the movie. The movie for us as human beings anyway is, we're not even interesting to the general program anymore. We're not. The program is pushing towards mutation. It's pushing towards the rave. It's pushing towards the end of the cycle. We're an afterthought in this process. It's why we have this perfect opportunity, the beauty of that, to see. And of course, whether or not it's for you to see, this is one of the great mysteries that you have to carry within yourself. I look upon it always in the same way that I look upon my own process, as one of great good fortune. I'm grateful every day of my life for such an adventure. And that adventure is an adventure with truth. I spent a long time doubting such a thing existed. At least the relative truth that one can rely on. A truth that, one can measure oneself. That's a beautiful thing. And, I'm a mystic. I didn't start out to be a mystic. It was never something that was interesting to me. I had it imposed on me. And at the same time, there's one side of me that's the mystic and the other side of me that's a very, very rational, practical man. And I look at the knowledge and I think, yes, wonderful mechanics. And I'm grateful for everybody who shows up at the door. I'm pleased for them that it's their serendipity to be there. What you do with it, I don't know. And being an integration being who's unemotional, I'm blessed with not really having to care. So I don't have to suffer for all those who get to the door and don't go any further. The beauty of this is that there's no promise in what I was given. There's just the beauty, the exquisite beauty of knowledge. I guess the thing in the end that makes the knowledge so elitist is that you do have to have two strikes against you. You've got to be slightly odd and you have to be slightly intelligent, you know. If you don't have that combination of being, well, different and intelligent, you don't get past the door. You know, the knowledge is what saves the personality from destroying life. The design is easy to deal with, you know, strategy and authority, you can teach a monkey, you know, but the mind, you know, this is healed through knowledge, through truth, through personal revelation. And then the joy of what it's like to be here. It's a hell of a movie. And yeah, I hope you all get to that place. Anyway, thank you for being here. I do appreciate it. It's nice to enter into our 23rd year, and thank all of you for your work in human design. And yeah, let's see what happens. All of you take care. Remember, in these times, and in our generation, we have never seen anything like what's going on right now. You trust in your strategy and authority. It'll carry you through, I tell you that. Anyway, bye for now.